The first time my son begged me not to leave, I told myself it was just a phase. That's the lie I start with now, because it sounds reasonable. Cleaner than the truth. The truth is, I was already halfway out the door when he grabbed my leg. I remember the weight of his small arms around my thigh, the way his fingers dug in through my suit pants like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid before it drifted away. "Daddy, please don't go," he said. His voice cracked on the word please. I looked at the clock over the kitchen sink, 7:42 a.m. late already. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a calendar reminder I didn't need. Client review. Don't screw this up. I pried his hands off gently, the way you're supposed to. Patient. The way parenting books tell you to handle emotions you don't have time to feel. "I'll be back tonight," I said. "Just like always." He shook his head hard. Too hard. Panic already there, way too big for his body. "They come when you leave." That was new. I froze for half a second. Just long enough to feel something cold slide down my spine. Then I did what I'd been doing a lot lately, I laughed it off. "Buddy," I said, crouching down so we were eye level. "Nobody's coming. You're safe." He leaned closer and whispered, like the walls were listening. "They hurt me." That word, hurt, should have stopped me. It should have pulled me out of my routine, shattered the momentum of my morning, forced me to ask better questions. Instead, I kissed his forehead and stood up. "I have to go to work," I said. "That's how I take care of us." Even as I said it, something in my chest twisted. Not enough to stop me. Just enough to remember later. I grabbed my keys. My briefcase. The armor I wore every day. Behind me, he started crying. Not loud at first. The quiet kind, like he was trying not to get in trouble for it. I didn't turn around. That's the part one have the hardest time saying out loud. Because if I'd turned around, I would have seen his face. I would have seen the fear sitting there raw and unfiltered, the way kids feel things before they learn how to hide them. And if I'd seen that, I might have stayed. But staying wasn't who I thought I was. I was the guy who showed up. The guy who provided. The guy who didn't miss meetings or call in sick unless he was actually dying. I'd built my whole identity around that. Every promotion, every compliment from my boss, every quiet nod from other men who recognized the grind, it all reinforced the same belief. Real men push through. Real men don't let emotions derail responsibility. Real men don't fall apart because a 6-year-old is scared of imaginary monsters. I drove to work with his crying still ringing in my ears. Tried to drown it out with a podcast about productivity. About optimizing time. About being effective. At a red light, I noticed my hands were shaking. I clenched them tighter around the steering wheel and told myself to focus. The office was already buzzing when I got there. Glass walls. Fluorescent lights. The quiet hum of people pretending they weren't afraid of falling behind. My boss nodded at me as I passed his office. "Big day," he said. Not a question. I smiled. Always is. For the next few hours, I did what I was good at. I talked numbers. I anticipated objections. I played the role I'd practiced for years. And every time my phone lit up on my desk, my heart jumped. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. Part of me felt relieved. Another part, smaller, but louder, kept replaying my son's whisper. "They hurt me." Around noon, I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. Just stood there, breathing, trying to figure out why my chest felt so tight. I checked my reflection in the mirror afterward. Same face. Same tired eyes. Same man who told himself he was doing the right thing. When I got home that evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. My wife was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. "Hey," she said without looking up. "Where's him?" I asked. "His room. He was cranky all day." I walked down the hall and pushed his door open. He was curled up on his bed, still in his school clothes, fast asleep. Tear stains dried on his cheeks. I sat on the edge of the bed and brushed his hair back. That's when I saw the mark on his arm. A faint bruise. Yellowing at the edges. It could have been anything. Kids fall. Kids bump into desks and door frames and each other. I told myself that story too. Still, my throat tightened. "How'd you get this, buddy?" I whispered. He didn't wake up. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my wife slept beside me. I replayed the morning over and over, editing it in my head. In the better version, I listened. I asked questions. I stayed. In the real version, I had a meeting. The next morning was worse. He cried the moment I put my jacket on. Full panic this time. Shaking. Sobbing. His nails scratched my skin as he clung to me. "They come when the door clicks," he said. "They say not to tell." I looked at my wife, expecting her to see what I was seeing. She sighed. "You're feeding his anxiety," she said. "My dad used to say you can't coddle fear out of a boy." Her dad. The thought lodged somewhere uncomfortable. I nodded, even though something in me resisted. I always did that, deferred, smoothed things over, chose peace instead of friction. I left again. In the car, my phone buzzed. A message from my boss. "Tomorrow's review is critical. Need you sharp." I stared at it for a long time. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The house made its usual sounds, pipes ticking, the fridge humming, but underneath it all was a silence that felt heavy. Watchful. I opened my laptop to prep for the meeting. Instead, I found myself searching, child anxiety when parent leaves, nighttime fear in kids, separation anxiety symptoms. Every explanation gave me an out. I wanted to take it. Then I heard him cry out from his room. Not loud. Just my name. "Daddy." I went to him and held him until he fell back asleep. His body stayed tense the whole time, like he didn't trust rest. As I walked back down the hall, I made a decision that felt small in the moment. I wouldn't go in tomorrow. I told myself it was just one day. Just to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. That I hadn't missed anything important. I didn't tell my boss. I didn't tell my wife. I set my alarm like normal. And when morning came, I kissed my son's forehead and told him I was leaving. Then I waited until the door clicked. And I stayed. By the time I parked 3 blocks away from my own house, my hands were already sweating. I sat there with the engine off, listening to the ticking sound it made as it cooled, staring at a place I'd lived in for 8 years like it belonged to someone else. The curtains were open. The lights were off. Nothing looked wrong. That was the problem. Nothing ever looked wrong. I checked my phone out of habit. No messages. No missed calls. My boss hadn't noticed I was offline yet. That gave me a strange sense of relief and a deeper sense of shame. I slipped out of the car and walked back quietly, the way you do when you don't want to be seen doing something you can't explain. The front door was locked. Normal. I unlocked it slowly, wincing at the sound, and stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. Ordinary. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing. Then I heard my son's voice. Not crying. Not screaming. Talking. I moved down the hallway, each step careful, deliberate. His bedroom door was cracked open. I stopped just short of it, my heart pounding hard enough that I was sure he could hear it. "I don't like it," he said softly. "Daddy said you shouldn't." Silence answered him. My mouth went dry. I leaned closer, close enough to see the edge of his bed through the gap. He was sitting upright, legs crossed, hands clenched in his lap. His eyes were fixed on the far corner of the room. "Please," he whispered. I pushed the door open. He startled, spinning around. His face lit up with relief so sharp it hurt to see. "Daddy, you came back." "I never left," I said automatically, then stopped. I crouched down in front of him. "Who were you talking to?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer could have. "They say I'm bad," he finally said. "They say I make you mad when I cry." Something inside my chest cracked. "Who says that?" I asked. He shrugged, eyes dropping. "I'm not supposed to tell." I sat with him until his breathing slowed, until his shoulders relaxed against mine. Eventually, he asked if he could watch cartoons. I nodded, my mind already racing ahead, trying to map a threat I couldn't see. I told him I'd be right back. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and drank it too fast. My hands were shaking again. I leaned against the counter and stared at the family photos on the fridge. Birthdays. Vacations. Smiling faces. Proof that nothing bad ever happened here. My phone buzzed. Where are you? My boss texted. I stared at the message. Deleted. Typed again. Working from home today. Kid stuff. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Tomorrow's review is non-negotiable. Need full focus. There was the unspoken warning. The reminder of what reliability bought me and what it cost. I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket. The rest of the morning passed in a strange limbo. I watched my son from the hallway as he played. Every noise made me tense. Every creak of the house felt louder than it should have. At 9:47 a.m., the doorbell rang. I felt it in my gut before I heard it. I checked the clock. Too early for deliveries. Too early for anything scheduled. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. My father-in-law stood on the porch. He was smiling. Relief hit me first. Immediate. Embarrassing. Of course, I thought. Family. I unlocked the door. Didn't know you were home, he said, stepping inside like he belonged there. Your wife asked me to check in sometimes. You know, help keep the boy in line. The phrase stuck with me. Keep the boy in line. My son appeared in the hallway behind me. The moment he saw his grandfather, his face drained of color. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He froze. That's not necessary, I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. My father-in-law chuckled. You worry too much. Kids need structure. Discipline. Not all this talking. He glanced down the hallway. Go on, champ. Back to your room. My son didn't move. I put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched. That flinch landed like a punch. I've got it, I said. You can head out. The smile on my father-in-law's face thinned. You sure? Your wife trusts me. I held his gaze. I said I've got it. He shrugged, like this was all mildly amusing, and turned back toward the door. Suit yourself. Just remember, you can't be soft forever. When the door closed behind him, the house felt smaller. I knelt in front of my son. Did he do something to you? He shook his head too fast. No. Did he say something? Silence. That was answer enough. The rest of the day passed under a shadow. I kept replaying the interaction, dissecting every word, every look. Part of me wanted to confront my wife immediately. Another part, the louder, older part, warned me not to blow things up without proof. That night, after my son fell asleep, I finally said something. He seems scared of your dad, I said carefully. My wife sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. You're projecting again. My father is old school. That doesn't make him dangerous. I saw how he reacted, I said. He needs to toughen up, she snapped. And so do you. That hurt more than I expected. I lay awake long after she fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. I thought about all the times I'd chosen being agreeable over being right. All the times I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. Reliability had been my shield. Show up. Don't complain. Don't rock the boat. But shields work both ways. They protect, and they block. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. HR will be in tomorrow's review, my boss wrote. Big opportunity if it goes well. I closed my eyes. Opportunity. That word had guided me for years. I'd chased it through late nights and missed moments, through birthdays celebrated on weekends instead of days. I wondered what it would cost this time. Down the hall, my son whimpered in his sleep. I got out of bed and went to him. He was curled tight, fists clenched, breathing uneven. I sat beside him until his body softened. I'm here, I whispered. I won't go. I didn't know if that was a promise or a lie yet. As I walked back to my room, I noticed something I hadn't before. The guest room door was slightly ajar. I stood there, staring at the dark space beyond it, an idea forming slowly, heavily, like something I didn't want to name. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'll know for sure. The hardest part wasn't staying. It was pretending to leave. I went through the motions like I always did. Shower. Suit jacket over the chair. Keys in my hand. I made sure my son saw me lace my shoes, heard the familiar sounds that told him what was coming. His shoulders tightened the moment I picked up my briefcase. You're going to work? He asked. Just for a bit, I said, keeping my voice light. Too light. I'll be back before you know it. He nodded, but he didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, the way he tracked every movement, like he was memorizing the last moments of safety before something bad happened. I hugged him longer than usual. He clung to me like he always did now, small hands gripping my shirt, his face pressed into my chest. His body was tense, like a wire pulled too tight. When I pulled away, he whispered, "Please don't let them come." I swallowed. I won't. That was the first promise I made that morning. I stepped outside, closed the door, and waited. I counted to 10, then 20, then 30. I listened to the house settle, to the quiet that followed the click of the lock. From the driveway, everything looked normal. Sunlight on the siding. A neighbor's car starting down the street. A life continuing the way it always did. I walked to my car, opened the door, then closed it again without getting in. Instead, I circled the house and let myself back in through the side door, moving slowly, deliberately, like I was trespassing in my own life. The guest room was at the end of the hall. It had become a storage space over the years, boxes of old clothes, a treadmill that never got used, a spare bed we kept promising to replace. I eased the door shut behind me and sat on the edge of the mattress. Then I waited. Time stretched in strange ways when you weren't supposed to be where you were. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator. Pipes ticking. The distant bark of a dog. I checked my phone once, then turned it off. From down the hall, I heard my son's door open. Bare footsteps padded across the floor. He didn't cry. That scared me more than the crying ever had. "Daddy?" he called softly. I stayed still. Silence followed. Thick, heavy. Then his voice again, quieter this time. "You can come out now." My chest tightened. I realized then that this wasn't a game he was playing alone. Minutes passed. Maybe more. I lost track. At some point, I heard him whispering. Not to himself. The cadence was wrong, too careful, too responsive. Like a conversation where he wasn't the one in control. "I didn't tell," he said. "I promise." I pressed my palm against my mouth to keep from making a sound. I wanted to burst out of the room. To scoop him up. To demand answers. But I stayed. That choice, to stay hidden, felt like the most unnatural thing I'd ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to intervene, to be seen, to assert myself. But another instinct, newer and sharper, told me this was the only way I'd see the truth. Footsteps sounded again. Slower. Heavier. They didn't belong to a child. I held my breath. The house went quiet in the way it does right before something happens. Then I heard it. The front door unlocking. Not opening. Unlocking. The sound was unmistakable, the soft metallic turn of a key that didn't belong to me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I checked the time on my phone before remembering I'd turned it off. Instinctively, I glanced at my watch. 10:03 a.m. The door opened. Footsteps crossed the entryway with familiarity, unhurried, confident. I knew those steps. They belonged to someone who didn't think he needed permission. The footsteps didn't go toward the kitchen. They didn't go toward the living room. They went straight down the hall. Toward my son's room. I stood up so fast the bed creaked beneath me. I froze, every muscle locked, waiting to see if the sound had given me away. It hadn't. A shadow passed beneath the crack of the guest room door. I heard my son gasp. "Grandpa," he said. There was no joy in it. No relief. Only fear. My father-in-law's voice followed, calm and steady. "What did I tell you about making noise?" I took a step toward the door, then stopped. I hated myself for stopping. But I needed to hear this. My son started. "Hands," my father-in-law said. The word landed like a blow. There was a pause. A soft rustle. Fabric against fabric. I imagined my son holding his hands out. Small palms open. Obedient. My vision blurred with rage. "This wouldn't be necessary if you listened," my father-in-law continued. "Your father spoils you. Makes you weak." Something scraped against the floor. I don't know what it was. I didn't want to know. That was the moment the last excuse burned away. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't discipline gone too far. This was control. And fear. And silence enforced by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I opened the door. The hinge made a sound, quiet, but enough. My father-in-law's voice stopped mid-sentence. I walked down the hall without rushing, without shouting. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, like I was carrying every moment I'd ignored up until now. When I reached my son's doorway, I stopped. My father-in-law stood inside, his back to me. In his hand was an object I'd never seen before and would never forget. My son stood rigid in front of him, tears streaming down his face, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. For a second, no one spoke. Then my father-in-law turned. His eyes widened, not with guilt, but with surprise. He hadn't expected me. "What are you doing home?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I stepped fully into the room. My son ran to me and buried his face in my side, shaking. That was the second promise I made that day. I rested my hand on my son's back and looked my father-in-law dead in the eye. "You don't touch him," I said. My voice didn't shake. "You don't come into my house," I continued, "and you don't ever speak to my child again." He scoffed, recovering quickly. "You're overreacting. This is how boys learn respect." I shook my head. "No," I said. "This is how fear works." For the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncertain. I pointed toward the door. "Leave." He hesitated. I took a step forward. He left. The house fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Awake. I held my son until his breathing slowed, until the shaking stopped. "I'm sorry," I whispered into his hair. "I should have stayed sooner." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. As I carried him back to his bed, one thought burned brighter than the rest. This wasn't over. And I was done pretending I didn't see it. The house didn't feel like my house anymore. After he left, after the door closed and the sound of his footsteps disappeared down the driveway, everything felt rearranged, not physically, but morally. Like the walls had shifted a few inches inward. Like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I was going to do next. I carried my son into the living room and sat with him on the couch. He didn't want to let go of my shirt. Every time I loosened my grip, his fingers tightened again, small and desperate, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he blinked. "I'm right here," I told him. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, but he didn't relax. Trust, I realized, doesn't come back just because you say the right words. I stayed there with him until his breathing evened out, until his head grew heavy against my chest. Only then did I look around the room. The same room where I'd spent years convincing myself everything was fine. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the pull to answer immediately. That part of me, the reflex to be available, agreeable, reliable, was still there, but it was quieter now. Drowned out by something louder. Anger. And beneath it, something sharper. Clarity. I put my son down gently and walked to the front door. I locked it. Then I locked it again, even though it was already locked. I checked the windows. Every one of them. Control. I needed it back. When my phone buzzed again, I looked at it. My wife. Dad stopped by. He said you threw him out. What's going on? I stared at the message for a long time. I tried to imagine how he'd told it. Reasonable. Probably concerned. I could already hear the version of me he'd described: unstable, emotional, overreacting. I typed slowly. "He scared our son." The reply came fast. "You're exaggerating." That word hit harder than I expected. I felt something in me go cold. I waited until she got home that evening. I didn't want to do this over text. This wasn't something you could fix with the right phrasing. She walked in like everything was normal. Dropped her bag. Kicked off her shoes. "Why is the door locked?" she asked. "Because I locked it," I said. She frowned. "What did you do?" I told her. Not everything. Not every detail. Just enough. Her face tightened as I spoke, her jaw setting in a way I recognized immediately. Defensive. Protective. "Did you actually see him hurt him?" she asked. The question landed like a test. "I saw enough," I said. "That's not an answer," she replied. I felt my temper rise, hot and fast. I forced it down. Our son is afraid of him, I said. He freezes when he sees him. He flinches when someone touches him. That's not normal. She crossed her arms. My father believes in discipline. That doesn't make him abusive. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Belief doesn't excuse behavior. She shook her head. You're projecting your issues onto this. Your stress. Your guilt about work. There was the familiar move. Redirect. Minimize. Make it about me. Maybe I am guilty, I said quietly. But not about this. She stepped closer. You embarrassed him. You humiliated him in front of his grandson. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't trying to understand. She was trying to win. I don't care, I said. I care about our son. Her eyes flashed. You don't get to decide that alone. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just about her father. This was about power. That night, she slept in the guest room. I sat at the kitchen table long after the house went quiet, my laptop open but untouched. Emails piled up. Missed calls from work. I didn't answer any of them. I kept seeing my son's face. The way his eyes had filled with relief when he saw me in the doorway. The way his body had gone slack the moment he felt safe. Safety. I'd spent years thinking safety meant money. A stable home. Health insurance. Predictable routines. I'd been wrong. Safety was being believed. Around midnight, I heard my son stir. I went to him and sat on the edge of his bed. Is Grandpa mad? He asked. No, I said. He's gone. For good. I hesitated. For now, I said. And I won't let him hurt you. He studied my face like he was trying to memorize it. Promise. I nodded. Promise. When I stood to leave, he grabbed my hand. Daddy, he said, are you in trouble? The question broke something open inside me. Yes, I said honestly. But that's okay. He thought about that, then nodded, like he understood more than he should have. The next morning, I woke up to silence. Not the heavy, waiting silence from before, but something strained. Like a pause between moves. My wife avoided my eyes. She left early without saying goodbye. My phone buzzed with a new message from my boss. Need to talk today. Urgent. I stared at it, feeling the weight of everything converge. Family. Career. Identity. I'd spent my life being the reliable one. The man who absorbed pressure so other people didn't have to. But pressure changes shape when you stop absorbing it. It pushes back. As I watched my son eat breakfast, calmer than he'd been in weeks, I understood something I couldn't unlearn. Doing the right thing was going to cost me. And for the first time, I was ready to pay it. By the third day, I understood something I'd never learned in all my years at work. Conflict doesn't start loud. It starts quiet. Polite. Documented. The first email came from my wife's sister. Subject line, concern. She wrote like she was checking in. Like she cared. She said she'd heard there was tension in the house and wanted to make sure everyone was safe. She used words like miscommunication and stress. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. The second email came an hour later, from my wife's mother. Longer. Warmer. More dangerous. She reminded me of how much her husband had done for us. The help with the down payment. The weekends he watched our son so we could focus on our careers. She said families sometimes disagreed, but that didn't mean bridges had to be burned. The message underneath it all was clear. We own part of this. I didn't reply. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts framed as concern but edged with accusation. You really scared him. This is being blown out of proportion. Think about what this could do to the family. Family. The word had always meant safety to me. Now it felt like a perimeter being drawn. My wife didn't come home that night. She texted instead. I'm staying at my parents'. We need space. I read it twice, then put my phone face down on the table. I looked at my son sitting across from me, pushing peas around his plate. He was quieter than usual. Watchful. Is Mommy mad at you? He asked. I chose my words carefully. Mommy is upset. That doesn't mean she doesn't love you. He nodded, accepting that in the way children do, temporarily. After he went to bed, I opened my laptop. There was an email from HR. We've been made aware of a situation involving your family. Please schedule a meeting to discuss. My stomach dropped. This was the part no one tells you about when they talk about doing the right thing. It doesn't just cost you emotionally. It costs you structurally. Reputation. Stability. Assumptions. The next day, my wife came by to pick up clothes for our son. She didn't come inside. We stood on the porch like strangers. They're worried about you, she said. About me? I asked. Yes, she said firmly. Your reaction. Your anger. My dad feels threatened. I almost laughed. Threatened by what? I asked. Being told no? She flinched but didn't answer. They're talking about getting a lawyer, she said. The words landed slowly. A lawyer? For custody, she clarified. Just to make sure everything's stable. There was the nuclear option disguised as concern. You think I'm a danger to him, I said. I think you're unpredictable right now, she replied. That hurt more than anything else she could have said. After she left, I sat on the couch and stared at the door for a long time. Predictable. That had been my brand. Now it was being used against me. I called a lawyer that afternoon. I hated myself for how prepared he sounded. Document everything, he said. Dates. Statements. Keep communication in writing. I hung up and looked around the house. Photos still on the walls. Toys still on the floor. Evidence of a life that was suddenly being reframed. That night, my son had a nightmare. I sat with him on the floor of his room, his small body pressed against mine, his breathing hitching as he cried. They said you're bad, he whispered. My heart stopped. Who said that? He hesitated. Grandma. The word felt like ice in my veins. I held him tighter. That's not true. He looked up at me, eyes searching. Are they going to take me away? That question. No child should ever have to ask it. No, I said. Not while I'm here. But for the first time, I wasn't entirely sure. The next morning, my boss called me into his office. HR was already there. They asked questions that sounded neutral but weren't. Was there stress at home? Had I ever raised my voice? Was I feeling overwhelmed? I answered carefully, calmly, reliably. When I left the building, my hands were shaking. I sat in my car and realized something terrifying. The family wasn't trying to understand what happened. They were trying to contain it. And containment meant sacrifice. Not him. That night, I packed a bag. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I needed to be ready. I kissed my son's forehead as he slept, memorizing the weight of him, the warmth. I'm not disappearing, I whispered. No matter what they say. As I zipped the bag closed, I understood the shape of the fight I was in. This wasn't about proving the truth. It was about surviving the lie. And I was done being quiet. The apartment was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, but the kind that follows a decision you can't undo. Every sound echoed, the buzz of the cheap refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the floorboard creak when I shifted my weight. I hadn't planned on being here. I'd booked the place the night before, after my lawyer suggested it might look better if things escalated. Look better. I hated how quickly I was learning this new language. My son sat at the small kitchen table, coloring with crayons I'd picked up from a gas station. He was focused, tongue sticking out slightly, the way he did when he wanted to get something right. I watched him like I was studying a miracle. Fragile, temporary, easily taken away. You don't have to be perfect, I said without thinking. He looked up. I know. That stopped me. He went back to coloring. I stayed where I was, the words settling heavy in my chest. I wondered who had taught him that lesson already. And why? The first night away from the house, he didn't sleep. Neither did I. He woke up every hour, crying quietly so he wouldn't get in trouble. Each time, I pulled him into my arms and reminded him where he was. That the door was locked. That no one else had a key. That I was right there. Around 3 a.m., when his breathing finally slowed, I stared at the ceiling and felt something I wasn't used to. Not the sharp, immediate kind. The slow, spreading kind that asked impossible questions. What if I lose? What if they believe them? What if doing the right thing costs me him? I'd spent my life preparing for failure at work. Backup plans. Emergency funds. Contingencies. I'd never prepared for this. The next morning, my wife called. I almost didn't answer. What are you doing? She asked. No greeting. Keeping him safe, I said. This isn't safety, she snapped. This is escalation. I closed my eyes. He was terrified in that house. He's confused, she said. Because you're confusing him. There it was again. The quiet insistence that my son's fear was my fault. I saw what your father did, I said. I heard what he said. Silence stretched between us. You're making him the villain, she finally replied. You're tearing the family apart. No, I said. I'm choosing our son. Her breath caught. You don't get to make that choice alone. I thought about that after the call ended. Because she was right, technically. But there were choices that stopped being shared the moment one side decided silence mattered more than safety. That afternoon, my lawyer called back. They're pushing for supervised visitation, he said. They're framing this as instability. Emotional overreaction. I felt my jaw tighten. And you? I think we need evidence, he said. And consistency. After the call, I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. These were the hands that typed reports, shook hands in boardrooms, held my son when he cried. I'd always believed control meant restraint. But restraint, I was learning, could look a lot like surrender. That evening, my son finally talked. We were sitting on the floor, backs against the bed, sharing a sandwich cut unevenly down the middle. He took a bite, chewed slowly, then said, He said I make mommy sad. My chest tightened. He said if I told you you'd leave, he continued. Like before. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry. He nodded. I know. That broke me. Not the crying. Not the fear. The understanding. Children shouldn't have to be that understanding. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked softly. He shrugged. You were always busy. And he said grown-ups don't listen. I closed my eyes. That was the man I'd been. Busy. Reliable. Absent. I'm listening now, I said. I swear. He leaned into my side, small and warm. Okay. That night, I wrote everything down. Dates. Words. Behaviors. Not with rage, but with clarity. I realized then that this wasn't about becoming aggressive. It was about becoming unmistakable. The man I'd been afraid to be wasn't violent or reckless. He was inconvenient. He was the man who asked follow-up questions. Who didn't smooth things over. Who was willing to be disliked. The next morning, I sent 3 emails. One to my boss, requesting time off, formally documented. One to HR, summarizing the situation without apology. One to my wife, stating boundaries clearly and calmly. I didn't threaten. I didn't beg. I stated facts. When I hit send, my hands were steady. Later that day, my son fell asleep on the couch beside me, his head on my thigh. I didn't move for an hour. As I watched him breathe, something shifted inside me. I stopped wondering who I needed to be to keep my job. I stopped worrying about who would approve of me. I started asking a simpler question. Who does my son need me to be when I walk into a room? The answer was uncomfortable and non-negotiable. I wasn't just fighting them anymore. I was finally standing up to myself. The meeting room smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. I noticed that first because it gave me something neutral to focus on. Something ordinary. The kind of detail you latch onto when you're about to walk into a moment that might permanently rearrange your life. My lawyer sat beside me, calm in a way I didn't trust yet. Across the table, my wife avoided my eyes. Her father wasn't there. That was deliberate. He didn't need to be. He was already in the room. Just not physically. HR started the meeting with practiced concern. Words like well-being and context floated around the table, soft and carefully chosen. They asked about stress, about my recent absence, about whether things at home had affected my performance. I answered evenly. Yes. I didn't elaborate. That alone seemed to unsettle them. Then the lawyer for my wife's family spoke. He was polite, measured. He framed everything as precaution. "We're not accusing anyone," he said. "We just want to ensure the child's environment is stable." Stable. The word again. My lawyer nodded, then gestured for me to speak. This was the moment I'd spent nights preparing for. The moment where I could soften the truth to make it easier on everyone, or say it plainly and accept the fallout. I thought of my son asleep on the couch, his head on my leg. I thought of his hands, clenched in front of him. I spoke. "My son told me he was being hurt when I left for work," I said. "I didn't listen at first. That's on me." The room stilled. I stayed home. I witnessed behavior that was frightening and inappropriate. I intervened. The other lawyer shifted in his seat. "You're making a serious allegation," he said. "I'm making a statement," I replied. "There's a difference." I slid my notebook across the table. Dates. Exact words. No embellishment. No rage. Just record. Silence stretched. My wife finally looked at me. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. The HR representative cleared her throat. "Why didn't you report this sooner?" "'Cause I was afraid," I thought. "Because I didn't want to be the difficult one. Because silence felt safer than conflict." "I didn't understand the cost of waiting," I said. The meeting ended without resolution. That was expected. These things never end cleanly. But something had shifted. Outside, my wife stopped me. "You're blowing up our lives," she said. I met her gaze. "I'm trying to save our sons." She looked away. That afternoon, I filed the report. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Methodically. I told the truth the same way I'd told it in the meeting, clearly, without apology. The officer didn't react the way I expected. No shock. No disbelief. He nodded. "We see this more than you think," he said. That sentence carried more weight than anything else that day. It meant I wasn't alone. At work, the consequences came quietly. The promotion was postponed. My workload shifted. Invitations stopped coming. No one said I'd done anything wrong. They didn't have to. That evening, I sat with my son on the apartment floor, building a lopsided tower out of blocks. "Are you mad?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm tired." "Did I do something bad?" I set the block down and turned to him fully. "No. You did the bravest thing you could. You told the truth." He considered that. Then he nodded. Later, as he slept, my phone buzzed. A message from my wife. "They want to talk again." Without lawyers. I stared at it. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel pulled to respond immediately. I wasn't afraid of silence anymore. I was using it. Back. Only if our son is protected. In writing. I set the phone down and leaned back against the couch. The cost was real. The fallout ongoing. But something fundamental had changed. I wasn't trying to be believed anymore. I was standing where the truth was. And no one could move me. Safety didn't arrive like a victory. It didn't feel like relief either. It came quietly in pieces, spread out over weeks. In paperwork. In short conversations. In doors that stayed locked. The apartment we moved into was smaller than our old place. The walls were thinner. The neighborhood was louder. But when I closed the door at night, no one else had a key. That mattered more than square footage ever had. My son adjusted faster than I did. Children often do. They accept safety the way they accept sunlight, without needing to analyze it. The first night he asked if the door was locked. "Yes," I said. "Both locks." "Yes." He nodded, rolled onto his side, and was asleep within minutes. I stayed awake longer, listening to the building breathe. Pipes ticking. Footsteps overhead. A siren far away. Normal sounds. Harmless ones. At work, things never went back to the way they were. I wasn't punished openly, but I wasn't trusted the same way either. I'd crossed an invisible line. The one where you stop being predictable. Predictable men make institutions comfortable. I learned that. The promotion disappeared quietly. My name stopped circulating in meetings. I was still employed, still useful, just no longer groomed. For a while, that stung more than I expected. I'd spent years believing my value lived there. Then one afternoon, I picked my son up from school early. He ran toward me with his backpack bouncing, grinning in a way I hadn't seen in months. "I wasn't scared today," he said, like it was news. Something inside me loosened. That was when I understood the trade I'd made. And why I'd make it again. The legal process moved slowly. It always does. There were supervised visits. Written agreements. Boundaries laid out in careful language. My wife and I spoke through messages at first. Then briefly in person. She looked older. So did I. "I didn't want to believe it," she said once, standing in the parking lot between our cars. "I know," I replied. That was all. Some truths don't need to be debated. We learned how to speak without trying to win. About schedules. About school forms. About what our son needed. Not about the past. The past had already done enough. One evening, weeks later, my son sat beside me on the couch, drawing. He pressed hard with the crayon, lines dark and messy. "Daddy." "Yes. You won't leave me like before?" The question wasn't accusing. It was careful. "I still go to work," I said. "But I come back. And if you ever feel scared, you tell me. And I listen." He nodded, then added another line to his drawing. That was trust, rebuilt one sentence at a time. Late that night, after he fell asleep, I stood by the window and looked out at the city. I thought about the man I'd been. Reliable. Quiet. Afraid of disruption. I thought about how easily I'd confused providing with protecting. How long I'd believed that keeping the peace was the same as keeping my child safe. It wasn't. Peace is often just silence that hasn't been challenged yet. My phone buzzed. A message from work, asking if I'd consider a lateral move to a smaller team. Less visibility. More flexibility. I read it twice. Then I typed back yes. I didn't need the old version of success anymore. The last thing I did before going to bed was check the door. But I turned off the light and lay down, exhaustion settling into my bones. For the first time in a long time, it felt earned. I wasn't proud in the way movies show it. I was steady. And in the quiet, with my son breathing in the next room, I finally understood what safety looks like. It looks like listening. It looks like inconvenience. It looks like choosing the harder truth and living with it. Every day.